Hi everyone, I am here with another true story from Guidepost. This one is by Matt Salisbury and it is called Under the Shadow. On the afternoon of May 7th, 2005, a forward operating base warrior in northern Iraq, my close friend and recon teammate Jeff, and I returned from a mission. We stopped at the operations center to store our body armor and then went to park our hodgepodge armored Hummer. We were getting out of the vehicle when I remembered my coffee mug, without a doubt the single most important piece of my equipment after my rifle. This caused us to pause for about 5 seconds as I grabbed my cup, lodged in the back of our vehicle. Jeff walked slightly ahead of me. I was just to the front of the Hummer when the whistling started. An instant later, the rocket hit. It didn't impact and explode somewhere in the distance in a field or outside our walls. It hit less than 40 feet directly in front of us both as we stood in open flat ground with only our Kevlar helmets hanging loosely from our heads for protection. The world became like a 3-dimensional picture that I could observe but do nothing to affect. Time moved at a crawl. I watched the burst form and the dirt fly, and I saw the deadly shrapnel and rock debris begin to race toward us, with one bit in particular heading directly for Jeff. Jeff dove back toward me. I think he was trying to jump on me or push me back. I stood there frozen. The blast wave continued toward us, filled with debris and deadly bits of jagged metal. Just as it reached us, a small, barely visible circle of life blossomed before us, and the debris fell to the ground. I don't know how else to describe it. At that instant, time reasserted itself and things moved fast. I heard the wall to our right and the vehicles to our left get peppered with shrapnel, and the all too familiar hiss, thrum, and whine of steel cutting the air before impact. The hard concrete wall was blast-pocketed. The velocity would have served severed limbs and evaporated heads and torsos with raw momentum. Jeff and I stared at each other. Then we ran toward cover, laughing like madmen at our near miss. We both realized we just observed something that should have had terrible consequences. When we got to our room, Jeff and I were quiet for a time. Finally, I said, "Hey, Jeff, did you see how the debris and shrapnel just dropped in front of us? How it seemed to just stop in midair?" Jeff was silent for a while, then shook his head and said, "Yes, I saw that too, and I can't figure it out." It was several days before I had time to catch up on emails from home. That day, I quickly scanned the list, intending to start with those from my wife. Then I noticed 3 messages in order, one from my mother, one from Jeff's mom, and another from my mother. The final bearing a red exclamation mark indicating urgency. They all had the word dream in the subject line. I opened the second one from my mom. She was frantic. On the night before Jeff and I had our near miss, both our grandmother and our mother began to feel panicked and worried for my safety. My grandmother called friends and asked if they would remember me in their prayers that night. They did. In the last email, my mother was anxious for a response and an update from me. She realized that my team and I were gradually out of contact for long periods. Further, every time we had an injury or fatality, all external communications were shut down until the military could locate family members first. As I read the letter, I realized that based on the time differences, my mom and grandmother were frantic less than 8 hours before the rocket was to explode in front of Jeff and me. The email went on to say that the next morning, after Grandma had reached out to her friends to pray for us, one friend called with an interesting story. This woman, a lifelong friend of my grandmother's, said, "I had a special dream. I saw your grandson lying on a raised platform like a bed, sleeping peacefully with a protective film of fabric covering him." She continued, "When I saw this, I knew God was showing me that your grandson is covered in his protection." As I look back on my 18 months deployed in Iraq, I realize I had enough close calls to fill a small book. This is true of many military personnel in a combat zone. I realize, too, that in months of exposure to fine dust, oil smoke, tuberculosis, flu, and common colds in Iraq, I was sick only twice, each time for about 8 hours. This is contrast to frequent colds, sinus infections, bronchitis, and pneumonia that I've had since age 10. Now back home, I've struggled with these again, and I am appreciating that while in Iraq, I enjoyed a time of nearly perfect health. Psalm 91:1 says, "Whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty." I continue to thank God for his protection, his shadow which covers me. Amen. Many stories like that where a loved one or someone close to them has a dream about someone like that. Many times. Hope you guys have a great rest of your night. Bye, guys.